stars come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh! Oh my goodness!
2 on the clock.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Basketball Fix. It's Beyond the Buzzer, our weekly show where we look at everything to do with the NBL, what's happened, what's coming up, preview some games and talk about basketball. I'm here as usual with my two main men, NBL basketball experts, Josh Higgins and Jeremy Darke. Boys, how are we this week?
Very good, mate. Looking forward to obviously diving into another exceptional week in the NBL and obviously previewing next round. But yeah, looking forward to it, obviously. And finally was able to completely watch a full round of NBL basketball live this week as well with a VPN, which was great. So shout out NordVPN in this episode.
Quick sponsor, NordVPN, if you're listening. NordVPN, calling NordVPN. Ryan, I'm really good, mate. I'm a year older after this week. Feel old.
Yes, happy birthday, mate.
Thanks, but much the wiser, I believe, and it'll all come out this episode, I'm sure.
You are a very wise guy.
Wise guy, yeah, a wise guy.
All right, boys, let's get stuck into today's episode. And first up, we're going to talk about what has happened in the NBL. And there are some things to get down and dirty. And we're going to quickly just touch on CG43 before moving on, because I have it written here. And the goal, Josh, I'll let you just, you put out an article about this on the basketballfix.com and got a fair bit of reactions. Just give us your 1 minute take and then we'll move on to something else.
Yeah, it caused a little bit of a stir there, mate, didn't it? But basically what happened was, at the end of the day, a guy like Chris Goulding has made a career in obviously making big shots in the NBL. But with his reputation as being one of the best players in the NBL, there is a reputation going around that he is the biggest flopper in the NBL currently and probably in NBL history. And that is my opinion right now. And obviously that's backed up with some statistics as well. And at the end of the day, though, when you do a Google search of Chris Goulding flopping, there are articles from going back to 2013 on there touching on this topic itself. So this isn't a new thing in the NBL, and I don't understand that a lot of people got outraged by that, and I can understand why they did, but at the same time, he flopped definitely against Southeast and Phoenix last week in that throwdown game, but this week it's all come to a head again with Justin Tatum's comments saying that we saw Chris Goulding flopping right in front of us, and we're just happy that he didn't injure himself from the flop and got a $3,000 fine. So it's been an interesting week in the NBL with the Chris Goulding side of it, and obviously over here at the Basketball Fix as well. And it was a very interesting week, but it only adds another chapter, another story to the Chris Goulding flop diary, which we mentioned there on the Basketball Fix article as well. So we won't go into too much detail on that just yet. I think there's a lot of things, and I think it's been played out a lot in the media over the last couple of weeks. But yeah, as far as one of the biggest topics from the week, that's definitely up there for sure.
Now, I just think if it wasn't an issue, it wouldn't have been as big as it was. So I think a lot of people that go to the defense of Chris Goulding, he's been a great player, but like you said, it's the biggest thing. Type anything in Google and all you'll find is truth. And if it dates back that far, it's obviously something that's come up. So there must be at least a little bit of truth behind it. But as we've said, I think even the great Andrew Bogut said, Chris Goulding, great guy, one of his best mates, bit of a flopper. So, I think it is an issue there, but it's nothing, it's not a big deal. It's not a little deal, but you've just got to sort of take that stuff on the chin, I think, when there is a little bit of a history there. But we move on. Next week's another week, another chance for Chris Goulding to have a flop, maybe. We'll see.
Well, I think everybody has run with this story this week, and let's run from there. Boys, There is a bit of an injury crisis in the NBL, and there's really no team that has been spared. But, Jez, I want to throw to you on this one, mate. You've got a long list of players here that are currently out for their teams. Can you kind of just give us an overview of the players that are missing and from what teams, and then we can dive in a little bit further into this?
Yeah, well, it's pretty crazy because a lot of it is actually, you'd probably say in most teams, it's top three players in their lineup. It's top three starters that are getting injured, and it's really, really starting to test the depth of every team in the NBL because we can go in alphabetical order. Brisbane, Sam McDaniel's gone for the season. Tanner Groves been out for a month. Tanner Armstrong, been in and out. Still not even sure if he's going to play this week, but he's, I think, only played 2 games this season. Cairns again. Bradshaw got ruled out late with an ankle injury. Now you've got like MVP favourite Trey Kell went down, missed this weekend. Delhi was out also this weekend. Shaili out. Like, this list is crazy. Mitch McCarron gone till round 10. Moavi King missed. Obviously, Bryce Cotton, another MVP, gone for we don't know when either. Ty Webster missed the games for Perth. Derek Walton Jr. gone for a couple of rounds, which accumulates to at least 4 games for Southeast Melbourne. Jalen Adams, who was in and out with the back injury, now there's even reports that he's going to be out for an extended period of time. So just every team is suffering, and it's these big names that you can't really replace. And you've done a lot of work in the preseason and the opening few rounds that, like, where you're building offenses and defenses around these key players, and now you've got to just straight away, I don't know, think on your feet, do different things week by week in training to try and deal with some of these out. So I think that's why we're seeing straight away, like, some of these big teams losing, some of these unexpected wins. There were some pretty crazy results this week again, and it is due to injury, I believe.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one because, like, when we look at the NBL preseason, for example, it only runs for 2 to 3 weeks and then the season pretty much just kicks off straight away. So these guys, one, aren't getting much of a chance to, I guess, mesh and gel as a team, and two, aren't getting that much of a chance to get a lot of physical sort of fitness into them. And I know these guys should be rocking up physically fit to be able to play basketball. They're professional athletes, but some of these guys may be coming off injuries elsewhere that we don't know about right now before they get over here. So if they're not getting that sort of a couple of months fitness-wise into them, we are going to see a lot of these injuries. And when we're looking at the list, a lot of them are short, a little soft tissue injuries. You know, there's a couple of rare injuries, like obviously Sam McDaniel and obviously the Bryce Cotton injury as well, which was just an absolute fluke out of all of them. But a lot of these are soft tissues, you know, things like calves and some backs and hamstrings and just all those certain things which normally correlate with fitness issues. So it's going to be interesting to see how the NBL combats that, because it's going to take some time for these little things to get away and obviously go from there as well. So it's going to be interesting, but it's a good little topic to touch on.
Yeah, I think really that, like, it is that, like, you see, especially some of these big name players and imports, they're off season. They are playing with teams maybe in Europe, in Asia. And I think the difference between, say, maybe other professional sports, especially here in Australia, you're working constantly with your team's strength and conditioning unit. And maybe that's something that plays effect, especially when you're not getting so much preseason with your own specific team, because you don't know what's going on, in Europe with another team, or, like, how do you put that faith in them that they're making sure that your player that is going to come here and play is getting the right conditioning and training that they need? Like, you would expect, say, the NRL, for instance, a lot of teams go back in December a little bit, have a bit of a Christmas break, straight in January, and then the games start middle of March. And so you're getting that full bulk of proper strength and conditioning training. And maybe that's what the issue is, like, because players shouldn't be going down like this, especially your big stars. They need to be protected, and they need to be at absolute peak fitness, because they're the ones earning all the money. They're the ones you're building your team around, and now they're getting hurt.
Yeah, but, like, I don't know. They play NBL 1, almost all of them. So they have, the games under their belts. And Josh, I'm not really, like, you said the soft tissue injuries, but, there's a couple of 3 or 4 of these guys are ankles. A couple of guys are doing knees. I don't think it is to do with strength and conditioning. I think a good chunk of this is just unlucky. And because the game itself is so physical and so hard that, and if you compare it to maybe the NBA, everybody says it is a much harder, more contact game here. So I think it probably has more to do with that. And when you look at teams that have the depth, they are starting to kind of reach the top now. And I'm wondering, is this the reason why the Sydney Kings, despite all the stuff we've been saying about them and their rotations and how many players and all that, is that why they're still favourites, Josh? Because they have probably the best roster in the league still with these injuries.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one because when you are touching on these injuries, I don't think we obviously try to forecast who's got the best roster if, let's just say, X, Y, and Z goes down. But that's where the depth does come into it, you know. But at the end of the day, though, I don't think they've got the right man for the job currently for that to be able to go on. Because I think even if those guys go down, let's just say Adams and Cooks goes down, there's still two other players. They played 10 on the weekend, and he's been playing 11 or 12 most other weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if two go down, that those other two just jump into the rotation. So does it really give you an advantage? Yes, it probably does, but you're still having very, very poor players, in a sense, be playing big minutes just the way he's been running his rotations. So it's going to be interesting because even looking at the weekend, they played Tyler Robertson when obviously Jalen Adams went down, and I don't understand why they're doing that and playing him big minutes. Now, a guy who I'm in a Discord group with who's a very respected journalist, obviously in the NBL, he's saying that a lot of past and present coaches in the NBL, assistant or head coaches, are confused by why Tyler Robertson is starting for the Sydney Kings. A lot of people are saying, why isn't it Jalen Galloway? Obviously, they'd love to see Cam Oliver in that lineup. There is a lot of things going on at Sydney that I don't think are going to be sorted out very, very soon. So whilst, yes, they are probably championship favourites if we're touching on depth alone, that's a great point, but I don't think they've got the right game plan right now or the rotational style for them to really succeed in NBL 25.
Boys, Southeast Melbourne have had a resurgence in this last week. They've put a couple of wins on the board. Josh, your mate Sobes has kind of turned back the clock. Well,
been okay.
Has he really? Nah, he's been all right.
Not really.
Yeah. 2-1 since the sacking of Mike Kelly. And their new coach is coming in. Is he taking over this next week, right? Not this coming week?
This week. No, he starts this week.
Okay. And you got Malik Lewis in the starting lineup, who's been doing extremely well. How do you see the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, Josh? Is this kind of a temporary resurgence they've had, or are they starting to be the team that maybe a lot of people thought they would be in the preseason?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one because when we look at the start of the year, I think a lot of people had some high expectations for this team. Now, I'm not talking championship, but making the playoffs is a very, very high sort of mark from obviously where they were the last couple of seasons. And they finally started to sort of touch on it. And I sort of flagged something a few weeks ago with basically saying that we know what it's like when a superstar player goes down or a coach gets sacked. The team all of a sudden figures it out and plays well, and everyone sits back and goes, oh, it was the coach's fault, where necessarily it might have not been a coaching problem. It might have just been an ego problem with some of the players with the coach. So I think that's what we've seen here with Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. But the other thing that I want to touch on quickly is the fact that I think they've had a little bit extra time to gel together. We've got to remember that the whole foundation of this team is brand new. There hasn't really been too much of the same faces from last season to this season who were sort of, I guess, leadership players. You know, you look at guys like Jordan Hunter, Angus Glover, Nathan Sobey, even Malik Lewis as a youngster have all come into this team and they're fresh. And then you've obviously got Derek Walton Jr., Matt Hurt, and then obviously Wisekamp as well. So it's going to be interesting because I've just listed off 7 new guys to this team, which is a major turnover. And that doesn't just take 1 or 2 rounds to figure out how they're going to play together. That takes quite a few months to sort of figure out. So I think they're starting to see a little bit of, coercion, I guess, on the court. We got that word right this time, boys, but a bit of coercion on the court.
Well done.
And they're starting to figure out how each other wants to play and how they obviously want to play their basketball game as well. But you touched on Nathan Sobey there as well. I think he's been okay. I'll give him that. He's been okay these last couple of weeks. The game against Illawarra, though, was pretty poor. So he had 14 points on 4 of 11 shooting, 2 of 6 from the 3-point line, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 5 turnovers as well. And just, I guess, he's the leader of this team right now with obviously Derek Walton Jr. out of the game for a couple of weeks. And I'm just not certain that he's the guy who is going to lead this team right down to the line if anything does happen. Because if you look back to that last sort of quarter against Illawarra Hawks, where the game was in the balance in that whole last quarter there, we look back to Nathan Sobey, a missed three-point shot. He had a missed layup. He gave away a personal foul really, really late in the piece, had another missed three-point shot, and then caused 2 turnovers in that last quarter as well. So if we're looking at someone who's going to be able to change the game and lead this team to victory, I'm not certain it's him. But obviously the new coach comes in this week, Josh King. I loved the move of Owen Foxwell starting last week. I think it was a really nice injection. Whilst his scoring and his points weren't there, it was his defensive roles and impacts that he had a really good little look at, obviously on Parker Jackson Cartwright, which I flagged last week. So I like that move. Malik Lewis is playing well. They've got a really, really solid team, to be honest with you guys. So I don't know if the sky's limits necessarily, but if this new coach comes in and gets the best out of all these players, they could be in for a late resurgence in NBL 25 and could threaten that top 6.
Now, Jez, Josh King coming in, he's known to be a defensive-minded coach. What have you been able to kind of source in your research about him, and how do you see that working out for the Phoenix, who have been a pretty under-average defensive team so far?
Yeah, well, I think that's been their biggest problem since they came into the league, has been their defense. They've clocked in like a lot of scoring. They've had some big guys, obviously like the most famous Mitch Creek, that has been an elite scorer in the league. But the biggest thing has been their defense. So just sort of going back to the years from the beginning of the Phoenix, and they have never ranked higher than 6th in opposition points against since they came into the league. So, and they've obviously been as lowest as last in the league like they were last year. But I think that also had a lot to do with, it felt like they gave up last season, but it has been anywhere between the 6th and 10th really. So bringing in someone that has this defense first attitude. Now, sort of also dived in, did the old famous get on Google and have a look, okay, what's happening when you type in Josh King and what is he known for? And from team to team, when they do that typical press release of, okay, Josh King's coming to our team, it's all about, okay, he's a defense first coach. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then, and then the other is basically he's known to be a bit of a hard ass. So I think that was also something that we said when we discussed Southeast Melbourne and how they were going to be able to be better this season and what they needed. And then obviously with the sacking, they needed to bring in someone that could deal with all of these, big players, big attitudes, obviously deal with the whole Sobey issue. And it's going to be someone that just doesn't take bullshit. And I believe that Josh King could definitely be the guy. And being defensive first, is very, very key for Southeast Melbourne. And you're going to get scoring from that talent. You have Hunter, you have Walton Jr., you do have Sobey. You've got guys that can score, but they've got to play D first and make sure that they can stop teams. And he's the man to do it.
Quick one though, Jez. Do you think they have the defensive lineup though to be able to go with it? Because I'm not certain that obviously a Sobey can defend for big minutes. I'm not certain that Derek Walton Jr. can, and a lot of these other guys are pretty unknown. So with the current roster right now, and obviously a 7 sort of game, I guess sample size to see, do you think that they've got that to be able to come in with a new coach?
No, like that's obviously the challenge, but they're not awful defensively. If you're looking at the games now, they rank 6th, the best they've ever ranked in 5 years. So if he can at least bring something a little bit more, once you start moving and become maybe, the 5th or the 4th best defensive team, and you have that scoring on your side, maybe they can, obviously, like you said, we're not expecting them to be a top 2, top 3, top 4 team even, but, I think their goal has to be, every team's goal every year, no matter where you finish the year before, is to make the playoffs. So if they can do something and be sniffing around that area, then I think it's been a success for Josh King. And then he gets his chance in the off season to bring in some players that he wants to bring in and be able to become an elite defensive unit while still having some scoring.
Now, boys, the Perth Wildcats did start life without Bryce Cotton, or for the foreseeable future without Bryce Cotton. And they did a lot better than what anybody really expected. Some other guys in the team that have been taking more of maybe a back seat so far this season. Keanu Pinda, Izan Armansa have really stepped up for this team. Josh, as the resident Wildcats supporter, how have you seen this kind of last week for the Wildcats, and what do you see in their near future?
Yeah, it was a good win. I think at the end of the day, when a team sort of has their back against the walls, we normally see a little bit of this sort of stuff where they come out and shock a team, or they come out and win a game they shouldn't win, and then it sort of falls away a little bit. But there were signs last night where it just looked like, or in that game, I should say, where it just looked like the fact that they've got all the right pieces and the depth to be able to sort of cover Bryce Cotton. And it's going to take some effort from Keanu Pinder, don't get me wrong. And I think we've got to look back to when he was playing at Cairns. He's probably the best one. I think that's the way to flag it, where they make him the primary sort of guy who the offense runs through. He's got to have 2 or 3 touches every single play when it's down on the court, because you've got to get him involved. Now, that's not necessarily saying he's got to shoot the ball every time the ball goes down there, but it's got to go through Keanu Pinder for it to be able to be successful, I think, for this Perth Wildcats team. Because outside of that, Dylan Windler hasn't really settled into the NBL yet. He's been rabbled with injuries so far. Christian Doolittle is not, I guess, the number 1 or 2 scoring option for this team, even with Bryce Cotton still. I think they've got Ty Webster ahead of him. I think they've still got Benny Henschel. I think they've still got Elijah Pepper. I think they've got a lot of people ahead of him. So when we're looking at, obviously, that particular performance, it was an incredible win. And I think even they got lucky, to be honest with you boys. So the Wildcats shot 15% from the 3-point line and 37% from the field. So compared to the Sydney Kings, who shot 35% and 49% from the field, it was a really, really interesting game in that sense as well. So, we saw a higher volume of shots for the Perth Wildcats, which was purely created by the rebounding count, which the Wildcats, who have notoriously struggled in rebounding, out-rebounded the Sydney Kings by 21 rebounds. So it was a really, really weird game in which we saw just complete shifts in some of these statistics compared to what we've seen from the Perth Wildcats and what we've seen from the Sydney Kings as well. So it sort of begs the question a little bit. Who needs their superstar player more? Is it Bryce Cotton and Perth Wildcats, or is it Sydney Kings and Jalen Adams as well? So it's going to be a very, very interesting watch for the Sydney Kings. But obviously on the Bryce Cotton side of everything, it looks like it's going to be okay here in Perth, obviously without Bryce for some time. And with Ty Webster coming back as well, that should lessen the blow a little bit.
Now, Jez, we'll speak on the Kings a little bit more further on the app here, but we can't be talking about the matchup between the Kings and the Wildcats without talking about the Kings players, and most specifically Cam Oliver. What are your thoughts around him over these past few weeks and his usage by Brian Goorjian?
Yeah, it's just crazy. Like Cam Oliver kept Sydney in that game, to be honest. He had a massive game and played extremely well. I don't have exactly his points on this game, but he put up 36 Supercoach points at least. So that was huge. But yeah, it's just unbelievable that what is happening there, because he doesn't seem to be in favour at all with Brian Goorjian. And I think from watching these 2 games, for me, it feels like it's his defensive attitude that Goorjian is having a bit of problems with. And I think you see that a little bit. He hasn't been playing defense as well. He hasn't been coming back hard. He's been more interested in what's happening on the offensive side of the ball than what's happening on the defensive side of the ball. So, and it came out a little bit in that game as well, because you look at Perth and what they've been averaging with points in the paint, and they absolutely hammered points in the paint against Sydney. They were like 10 more points above their average. And I think that does have a lot to do with where Cam Oliver is playing and what he's doing. It felt more so not just that they were scoring down low, but Perth were able to get closer in with their guards. And I think that's where Cam Oliver has sort of been sitting. He's been that little bit higher defender, and that's been a little bit lacking, I think. So, yeah, so for me, in relation to this specific game and Perth coming back and getting that big win, yeah, I believe Cam Oliver is struggling a little bit in Brian Goorjian's defensive structure, to be honest.
Well, we'll touch a little bit more on that when we preview the upcoming game for the Kings up against Melbourne United. Boys, it was a big round 6, and there was a lot to talk about. And I think it's pretty fun that there is some controversy around in the NBL. There's some teams that should be winning and are losing. The parity brought about by injuries is, I guess, it makes it a little bit more interesting because, like, what did we go in our tipping? We didn't even tip 50% this week, did we, or what?
Boy.
I don't think so.
I wouldn't
I
be
don't know.
surprised.
No.
1 out of 4 to start the week, at least on the Thursday and Friday. Terrible.
Sydney still killed all of my bets, so couldn't have been too good. Kings, man, Kings.
All right, let's look at the game preview between Melbourne and the Sydney Kings. There's a lot to kind of break out here, and it is player injuries, there's matchups galore, and the first thing I want to touch on, boys, it's Jalen Adams and Shea Ili missing from these two teams, and the matchup that we probably would have been focused a lot, very deeply on if these players had have been in the lineup. Who takes their place and who is going to be, what do you say, Josh? Who's going to be more in trouble without their main guy on the court?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because when I look at this and obviously touching on these two guys, they're key players for this team. Now, they obviously provide completely different sort of styles of play for their particular team. You look at Shea Ili, he's more of a defensive specialist and playmaker, you would say, and obviously can score the basketball, but he isn't the first or second option. He's probably the fourth or fifth option for Melbourne United. And then you flip it to the other side and you've got Jalen Adams, who's arguably their number one guy besides Xavier Cooks. And if it's Cooks number one, it's Jalen Adams number two. And, you know, he's a guy who can put up 20 to 25 points per game on any given night. He's a former NBL MVP. He's done everything at this level. He's won a championship. So I think when you look at it, Adams is probably the more respected player in the NBL. But I think in terms of pure importance, and obviously importance to team success, Shea Ili is the more important player missing for Melbourne United right now. So this matchup is definitely one of those things that would have happened in this particular matchup, and it sucks that we aren't going to be able to see it because Shea Ili loves these matchups. He loves going on against the best players in the NBL night in, night out. But it really does beg the question, who stands up for both of these sides? Now, obviously, Matthew Dellavedova is the obvious sort of pick here, but he missed all last round with an ankle injury, which wasn't really well reported by Melbourne United, and it cooked my Supercoach team, but that's a discussion for another day. But it's going to be interesting because Delly is definitely the guy to take over, but if he's not 100% fit, I'm not sure you can play him big minutes like we did see on the weekend. So it begs the question, who comes up next? Is it a guy like Flynn Cameron, who had a bit of a breakout week as well? He's not really a point guard, though. You got young Joel Foxwell, who's not ready for big minutes in the NBL just yet, who's a development player. There's a bit of an interesting take there as well. But when we look to the Sydney Kings, I mentioned it just before, Tyler Robertson is the guy who obviously they've been starting and persisting with at that point guard role, essentially. He's not a point guard, though, boys. We've seen him come out of college as a sharpshooter. He's a scorer first. He's not a guy at this stage of his career just yet who can facilitate the basketball at a high clip as well and get most of these guys involved. And I think they've really got to turn their attention, in my opinion, to Isaiah Leartha. Now, a bit of a Shea Ili mold, I think, personally. He's a guy who can score a lot better, though, I think, than Shea Ili. But his defensive capabilities are there with some of the best in the NBL. Now, I think they've really got to hone in on some experience here. They've got to go Isaiah Leartha starting and Sean Bruce coming off the bench as the backup point guard and really set that up for the next couple of weeks. Because if Adams is out for, let's just say, 4 to 6 weeks, it's a massive chunk of basketball to miss a star player in, and it really can either make your season or break your season, just like we've been touching on Perth over the last couple of weeks. So I'm not 100% sold right now that obviously Sydney have got the pieces to be able to, I guess, cover Jalen Adams' loss right now. But in terms of Shea Ili, I think Melbourne do, obviously with Matthew Dellavedova, obviously subject to his health and fitness right now.
And Jez, you're kind of, for Sydney's part, you're looking more maybe like Kouat-Noi to be getting some more minutes. Is he being underutilized at the moment by the Kings?
Yeah, I think absolutely. He obviously can defend. He's very, very strong in that aspect. And then you look at his ability to score. He's been the one that sort of changed the game a lot for all the Kings. He can hit the 3 ball, and that's what I think that they're missing. Because like we've mentioned, I don't know, since the start of NBL 25 when we started diving in, all we've been talking about, okay, Sydney are the deepest team in the NBL. Now, I'm not sure if that's true because they haven't been able to show that they can win consistently. They haven't shown that they can win like even dominantly when they have all their players in. They've gone 0 from 2 this week, going against a New Zealand team at home who have been traveling all around the world, that have been struggling against other opposition, and they go down to them. So yeah, I don't know if they are the deepest team. And now we're talking about them. Okay, they've got to move someone like Noi to be their main 3 shooter. Like it all of a sudden feels like that they are in a little bit of trouble at the moment because, yeah, like they don't have this guy that can replace the perimeter production that Jalen Adams gives, because it's not only what Jalen Adams does and produces, he also spreads the floor so it can open things up for their main strength, which is Xavier Cooks, Lepepe, these guys down low, even Noi when he's on, like working down low. And now it's sort of like, okay, yeah, we'll let these guys shoot, or we don't have to double anybody on the perimeter anymore because they're shooting. I think Sydney are a bottom 2, bottom 3 team in 3-point percentage. And it's like, okay, well, we'll let them miss their shots because we don't need to at least double up down there and push the defense high. But then then they can just cover what Sydney's strengths are, and that's down low. And especially at the moment, Xavier Cooks has been off the planet, so they need to make sure that they're covering him. So it is going to be really, really interesting in this game, I think, because even with Shea Ili out, they have found, like I know, Josh, you mentioned Flynn Cameron, but he's all of a sudden with these injuries to Ili and Delhi was out when his baby was born. Flynn Cameron's all of a sudden become their 6th man, and he's been impressive. Just pulling up his numbers from the last few games, like over the weekend, he had 2 18-point games. He's been getting rebounds as well. He's been extremely strong, and his numbers have been as good as anybody that's coming off the bench and playing 15, 20 minutes. So I'm been extremely impressed in what he can actually do.
Now, Josh, with the kind of the injuries that are at play, it begs the question about, okay, are you going to focus on what you have at your disposal? Are you going to go to the defensive end and try and lock down and restrict your opponents from scoring, or are you going to double down on your offense and try and just outscore your opponent? Do you feel that whichever team here decides to play the more defensive game, are they going to win, or do you think it's all about the offense?
Oh, it's a bit of a tough one because I think if you're Melbourne United, you're going to lock down on the defensive side of the basketball because you are one of the better basketball teams defensively in the NBL. But if you flip it to the other side of the story, though, the Sydney Kings, yes, they're not terrible defenders in the NBL, but they're not the great defenders which we have seen over recent seasons. So for them, I think it's more of an offensive shooting sort of game because that's the way that this team is built. You look at this team, and you've touched on, Jez, obviously, some of the players on this team, and it's a score-first team, realistically, isn't it? Like, the way they've built this roster is to put up 30 to 43-point shots every single night, play really, really fast in transition, attack and crash the boards, and then really get out. So you look at Bullquall, 3-point specialist and shooter, Tyler Robertson, 3-point shooter, Tui, a solid 3-point shooter, Cam Oliver's developed into a 3-point shooter, Isaiah Leartha, Jalen Galloway starting to get that going as well, Sean Bruce is known as a 3-point shooter, and then obviously you got Kawat Noi, and obviously Jalen Adams, who are all outside players and aren't really great inside. So the way this roster has been built is the fact that they are going to shoot the ball no matter what. And with that, obviously, does come with a bit of, I guess, controversy, because at the end of the day, if the shots aren't falling, which we have seen in recent weeks, they are going to lose games of basketball by a couple of points, or they're going to get blown out as well. So for them, I think they've got to go down the offensive sort of line a lot more than what Melbourne United do, because Melbourne can always fall back on their defensive structures, which has been their strength for such a long period of time in the NBL. Dean Vickerman has been one of those coaches consistently in the NBL who hones in on defense and obviously goes with that for a lot of the time as well. So it's going to be an interesting matchup because we know both these teams can score at a high clip, but missing key players, it's really going to sort of even the playing field out a little bit more. And we're going to see who is the better coach, I think, out of these two guys.
Yeah, do you think, I'm just trying to think, okay, what does Sydney need to do? If they've been playing the way that they've been playing, they like to shoot, they need to shoot to win. Do they go maybe down a little bit, sort of a road that the Boston Celtics did in their first game in the NBL, in the NBA, where they just threw up a monster amount of threes and they won. Okay, Sydney hitting at 33%. Do they need to then go, okay, they're shooting, I think, around 35-ish 3 points per game. Does that need to then increase, or they need to go to 45, 53 points a game and just play that? Because if that's their strength and they're not feeling like they're having much luck down low, then maybe they just need to throw up more. But yeah, does that play? Is that a play? Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But they could just
I think it does need a play.
Because that's their strength, so they need
extent.
to shoot. And maybe the percentage goes up the more they shoot. Maybe they find those areas, or all of a sudden it then starts to bring the defense out, and they might be able to find something down low.
I've got a little take on that, to be honest with you. It's just come to me. And I think one thing that obviously a good three-pointer team, you look at Golden State Warriors in the NBA for such a long period of time, the most key statistic and I think characteristic for a three-point shooting team or player is unselfishness. So if the shot's not there, you've got to find a better shot. Because the three-point shot is, in some sense, the most selfish shot in the NBL or basketball in general, because you're basically just heaving up a lowish percentage shot than obviously going into the post or anything like that to be able to get a layup. So when we look at that, is there a little bit of selfishness creeping into the Sydney Kings roster as people are trying to start to find out if they're obviously going to be in that 9 or 8 man rotation when it comes playoff time? So we're starting to obviously see guys fight for these spots and obviously are playing big minutes to be able to try and, I guess, figure out if they're going to have a spot in this team later on in the season. So are we seeing selfishness creep into the Sydney Kings roster in terms of obviously trying to find, I guess, their sort of 8 to 9 man rotation? Are you guys sort of getting what I'm putting down there? I'm trying to figure out the way to describe it, but we're obviously seeing these guys take some good shots, but obviously there's a few poor shots going into it as well. And if people are a bit afraid of where they currently sit in the roster, it does tend to happen where selfishness does creep in. So what do you reckon about that, boys?
Yeah, you know what, Josh? I actually think you could be onto something there, because it is a challenge that I think we expected at the start of the year as well, saying that they were the strongest team. They had a lot of superstars. Everybody's trying to find their place in the Sydney Kings team. I don't know if they're looking as far as, hey, the end of the season, but everybody's trying to maybe do just that little bit too much, and it could be hurting them. Obviously, players like, say, Xavier Cooks always going to be there, but I think it is these guards, and especially people that are fighting for position with, because of Jalen Adams being out. Tyler Robinson shoots better than what he's shooting, and he hasn't been playing so well. I think Liafa suffered extremely. It was some crazy stat at the start of the year where I think he hit 1 from 15 of his first few shots in those first few games for the Sydney Kings. But he has definitely been the guy that stepped up at least last weekend, and is starting to find his rhythm. But yeah, it was always going to be a challenge. And this could also be everything that's happening with Cam Oliver and trying to fit him in, because he's obviously feels a little bit out of place in that Sydney Kings lineup. He's maybe not getting used the way that he wanted to be used and thought he could best perform for the team. And it is a little bit of a part of it, because you've also got to play the role that the coach says you've got to play, and what the coach does think that is going to benefit the team in the best way with your skill set. And if you don't feel that is the way, you either bite the bullet, bite your lip, and you go in and you play your role. But it is a problem with some of these big personalities. And I think this was always going to be an issue for the Sydney Kings. And I think we've mentioned it over the last couple of weeks now. They need to sort that out. And you would think if there's any coach in the NBL, it's Brian Goorjian that should be able to sort this out. But he's struggling, I think, and he's not getting the best out of the players that he's got. And something needs to happen, and that could be something harsh, like moving on from a player, sitting a player, or moving some players around to get the best out of them, and making sure that everybody knows that they're all going to be there, they're all going to get the minutes. But it's hard with personalities, big personalities.
It is, boys. The game preview, we'll wrap that up now. And before we move on to the next segment, I want to know who wins this game.
Oh, it's tough.
Melbourne United.
Tough. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Melbourne United purely. I think you just got to trust defense in the NBL. We've touched on that plenty of times here at the Basketball Fix. So yeah, the stronger defensive team, I think you've always got to put your money on. But it's going to be a ripper of a game. These two teams are not fond of each other, and yeah, I'm looking forward to watching this one for sure.
It will be fun. All right, boys, going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and give our top 3 picks for MVP contenders after the first third of the season. Okay, boys, it is time to give our MVP rankings or contenders or whatever you want to call it. We are into round 7. A third of the season is done and dusted. There have been a couple of guys that have risen to the top so far. Josh, I'm going to go to you first. You can give your top 3 guys, then we'll hear from Jez and myself. But it is I think it's not a what do you call it when everyone thinks the same thing? Not a
I think it's a cult.
Consensus.
You call it a cult.
Yeah, we like those cults. No, it's not a consensus, but Josh, you kick us off, mate.
Yeah, no, we definitely haven't all picked the exact same 3 guys 100% of the way, I think, and even in the same sort of order as well. But yeah, I think I wanted to shut this in here because there's been a lot of conversation about who the MVP of the league is right now. And obviously a couple of the MVP fancies from the start of the season are obviously down with injury as well. And one went down on the weekend as well, Trey Kell. Now, I've left him out right now, but he's had an incredible start to the season. I think what he has done for this particular team in Illawarra, he's got them rolling. He's a really, really solid playmaker and scorer. But I've gone with number 3, a little bit of an outsider in some sense, I think. Now, what's the way to describe it? I think if we're touching on Defensive Player of the Year, this guy is it. And if we're touching on him being one of the best defensive players and he's putting up some really, really solid offensive numbers, I think he's got to be mentioned in the MVP sort of list as well. So I've got Christian Doolittle coming in as number 3 on my MVP rankings right now. I just think the way he started the NBL season has been just incredible. 15.3 points per game, 10.3 rebounds per game, and 2.7 assists per game as well. So they're not childish numbers at all. They are grown man numbers in the NBL, and he's been very, very dominant so far. Now, number 2 is Parker Jackson-Cartwright. Now, New Zealand Breakers have had a pretty good start to the season. They're starting to find their way. I think they've got a very good coach. They're obviously starting to, figure out who is the right sort of mold for them. And he's been outstanding. Looking at a guy who is leading the NBL in assists. He's up there in top 10 in points. He's just done everything for this team so far, and I think he's well and truly in the MVP mix come the end of the season. And if they win enough games, I think he nearly walks away with it because his offensive part of his game is incredible, but his defensive side of everything as well, again, like Christian Doolittle, is just as good. I think he's averaging just under 3 steals per game currently. So that's a massive number to have in the NBL, 4 or 5 games into a season. You expect to see 3 or 4 steals out of this guy, maybe come round 1 or 2, but when that average is still there, it's incredible. But number 1, I don't think is anyone's surprise at all right now. Montrezl Harrell, he's taken the NBL world over very, very quickly in his short time over here so far. And if he continues to play at this level, which I know he will be, he's definitely got to be the MVP favourite right now. 36 points and 16 rebounds on the weekend with 5 blocks. That's just unreal. So he is the MVP favourite for me. So Doolittle, Parker Jackson-Cartwright, and Montrezl Harrell is my top 3. What about yourself, Jez?
Yeah, absolutely can't disagree with anything you're saying there. And if Doolittle isn't in the MVP conversation, I think he has to take out at least probably the most improved player in the NBL because he's always been solid, but I think the numbers that he's putting up are above and beyond what he did last year. It is a little bit hard with an import, I think, getting most improved when you've only sort of played one season, or you only played one season and then it's playing another, but I think he's definitely been the key or the glue that's held Perth together. So very, very, very good picks there. And I'm a little bit different to you in, I guess, the next, or the 3 and the 2, but I'm definitely on the Montrezl Harrell train as the MVP, as the top guy. You saw what he did maybe when he didn't have to share the court a little bit with Isaac Humphries last weekend. Humphries was out injured and he just had an absolute monster game. And I think that's sort of that's the level that he can play at. I think he's playing a little bit of the team role sometimes, and gives up, I guess, statistically a little bit to Isaac Humphries to make sure that he's involved. But when he wasn't there, he's just like, all right, I'm the guy down here. I'm going to dominate. I'm going to play everybody. And he just busted chops all game. But for my, say, third ranked MVP, it's so tough because I'm almost looking at, there's guys like, say, Kendrick Davis that have also been extremely good. He's been the Robin to Montrezl Harrell, I guess, at Adelaide, and he leads the league in scoring. He also puts up a 5.8 assists per game. So he's been huge. But I'm going to jump on the Derek Rucker train and think Xavier Cooks is my third ranked MVP because he's been the only piece of the puzzle for Sydney that's an absolute lock. At the start of the season, he was averaging a double-double. Right now, he's averaging 17.6 points, 9 rebounds. You're also throwing 4.1 assists in there as well. And he's been the absolute animal there for the Sydney Kings. And then my number 2, got to stick with my boy, Trey Kell, because we saw what happened to Illawarra and how difficult their game was on the weekend when he was injured. And he's been the leader, I think, early, and sort of the quiet achiever. He seems to stay out of the media quite a lot. There's not a lot that gets written about Trey Kell, and I think that just shows that he is just sort of powering and puttering along, and he'll be there as long as he stays healthy. He'll be in the chat at the end of the season.
Now, boys, here's one for you. We spoke about how Adelaide's depth isn't maybe as good as what some other teams are, and that their starters are far outperforming their bench unit. Adelaide have a very, very tough schedule to finish the year. Where do they need to finish in the standings for a guy like Harrell or maybe even Kendrick Davis to be MVP? Josh?
Top 4 for me. Yeah, top 4. So I think that's the mark for an MVP in the league. I think with how close the season will end in terms of win-loss record, there's probably only going to be 1 win or even 2 wins max between finishing first and second to finishing third and fourth. So yeah, top 4 definitely. I think they've got to assert themselves in that and not be in a playing game for me.
Yeah, I think to get MVP, you can't sort of finish out of that range at all, and it's going to be, in my opinion, it's going to be extremely tough for them, especially if they start running into any sort of injury trouble. Because just sort of having a look now at the numbers that their first 5 played, with Davis played 39 minutes, Lat Mayan played 18 and sort of was the guy that got swapped in and out. This is in their game last weekend. Harrell played 41 minutes. Vasiljevic played 41, almost 42 minutes. And Sunday Dench played 36 minutes. So you can see how important their first 5 is. Obviously, Jarrell Martin's going to start to get a little bit more time when he gets a little bit healthy. But their 6th man in that game was Nick Marshall. And yeah, we love Nick Marshall on this show, and we see the potential there. But is he going to be able to sort of come in and play a key role that their top 5 do if someone gets injured? That's tough. I'm not sure if he's at the standard maybe of those top 5 in their team. So if they run into injury trouble, it's going to be tough for them to finish in the top 4. And then it will, as your question, Ryan, be tough for Harold to get the MVP.
Yeah, that's my thought. There's no way they're finishing top 4 with that squad. So Harrell is 3rd on my list. PJC at 2nd. I think they'll finish top 4, and he will. If Trey Kell doesn't get the amount of games up, if he's out for a longer period of time, PJC is the lock there. But if Trey Kell can get back from injury and finish the season, Illawarra are just gonna demolish the rest of this league, and Trey Kell will win MVP.
Jeez, you've changed your tune, mate, haven't you? You've taken your old team to the graveyard, and you're cleaning the new team up as well, mate. But I'll take $10 on you, mate, with Adelaide not making the top 4. I think they're a lock for top 4, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm going to have to start putting a calculator on all the money you owe me now. If Space Cam's not even getting on the court, there's no way he's getting first team NBL, or Colin's not MVP. Might have to stay.
Has to average my bets, mate.
Get that exchange rate to work. In your favor. All right, boys. Another quick break. We'll come back and preview game 2. Okay, boys, it is the Cairns Taipans and the Brisbane Bullets. Is it the the battle of the wooden spoon already after 7 rounds, with Southeast Melbourne getting a couple of wins under their belt? These two teams are down at struggle street. Jez, I want to throw to you first, mate, and talk about the matchups we see here. Both teams have some great players, and the big men more specifically. I'm thinking Wardenberg for Cairns and Harrison and Zakarski for Brisbane. Can we see some of these guys battling down low, or do you think it's going to be a shootout? What do you predict in this game?
I think for Brisbane, they want to get the ball down low, to be honest, because I believe that's where Brisbane have their strength. And before we sort of dive into anything there, I think we have to wait and see what happens with Taran Armstrong before you can sort of really, really get in here, because he is expected, or the early reports, he was expected to play, I believe, but he could potentially still be out for this game. But either way, I think the game's got to be, for Brisbane, they need to move the ball to Harrison and Bannon. Josh loves a good banana man, and you see what he can do and how he's changed things for Brisbane. There were, besides going down a lot early against Tasmania, they fought their way back and they almost snatched the game away. And for me, it's all about the points production for them. Especially from Montrezl Harrison, because the games that they have won this season, he's been able to be just as offensive as he has been defensive. And that's sort of the key that they need to make sure that they unlock, because it also helps when Harrison's productive with the ball in hand. We also saw that it opened things up and it gave guys like Cook and James Bateman a lot more space, and then they were shooting at a much higher percentage and scoring as well. So if they can unlock Harrison early in the game, and it sort of felt like in those games that they did win, that it was Bannon that was really focusing on getting those rebounds offensively and defensively, and then they were trying to open up space for Harrison to score. And I think that's the key for them, and they need to do that, because otherwise they do find themselves in a little bit of trouble, because they're not spreading the floor enough at all.
Now, Josh, these two teams have a massive rivalry. There's been a lot of stuff happen between them over the years. What are you looking forward to seeing in this matchup? Can you see any kind of sparks flowing already, or is there some jabs coming? What are we gonna see out of these teams?
Well, this game is called the Sunshine Stoush. Now, this is going to be an interesting matchup for sure. Now, we just got to look back to, I think it was last year, where Aaron Baines was just lost his mind, to be honest with you. The old angry, guy who just
put him in retirement in the end, didn't
it? Year. It did. And now, if you're not aware of what happened, Aaron Baines had a hard foul on, I believe it was Bull Quoll in that particular matchup. And Adam Ford, Baines got ejected. Adam Ford went over there and saw him at halftime. And Baines physically threw him up against the wall there as well. Had him in a bit of a choker hold there, which was pretty interesting. And then the next time they played, I think it was AK Gak, went and really had put a hard foul on Aaron Baines. And Bainesy didn't like that either. And there was a bit of a fight on the field, and you could also hear a bit of words and language getting thrown around as well. And it was a very, very physical game from then on. And these have been incredible matchups for not only last season, but the last couple of years as well. And I look at this game and I think these two teams are both needing a win. They've both come into the season pretty poor, and obviously Cairns are a little bit excused in terms of a couple of injuries, and I think Brisbane are excused in some sense of the imagination as well, because what did we really expect from this team? We weren't expecting them to be a top team in the NBL. We were just expecting them to sort of be okay. But both of these teams are desperate for wins in this particular matchup. So in terms of obviously the fireworks and the fighting sort of aspect of it, there's a couple of players in this particular game who are going to have that. And I think the big matchup's going to be Rob Edwards taking on Mitch Norton as well. And Mitch Norton, well, I know he's a small guy, but he loves physical contact as well. And I think he's going to test Rob Edwards. We haven't really seen how he goes with a really physical defender like Mitch. And yeah, I think in these rivalry games, you look at to obviously, in the AFL, like West Coast Eagles taking on the Fremantle Dockers, or Adelaide Crows taking on Port Adelaide. these are really, really tightly contested games. And I think there's no better sort of state v state team in the NBL in terms of obviously the sort of fighting aspect of everything as well than the Brisbane Bullets taking on the Cairns Taipans as well. So I'm excited for this game. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting game in that sense. And we're going to really see another chapter to this rivalry be, I guess, written this week as well in the NBL.
Now, Jez, Rob Edwards fouled out in his game last week. I mean, it was only after like 20 minutes of game time. He has had to take a lot of expectation onto his shoulders as the import in Cairns and with Taran Armstrong being out. Do you think this is kind of a kind of, what do you call it, a blackout moment for him, that it got away from him and it was the situation? Or is this kind of maybe the fruits of that coming out now, that he's had to carry this team essentially, or the expectation is rested on his shoulders and he's maybe having trouble dealing with it? How do you see his role in Cairns, and do you think he can kind of pick himself up and get back on the court here against Brisbane and put up a good number?
Yeah, well, you certainly hope that it was just a one-off, to be honest. But I don't know. I think we have seen signs from Rob Edwards that he has a very, very big personality and a big attitude, and expects to be the guy. And loves to, I don't know, talk shit and get in people's faces and all of that sort of thing. So it is going to be a really, really interesting clash between him and Norton, because I think if Norton can get under his skin, all of a sudden he falls down into that quicksand again and can be a little bit hot-headed. But I think he has to be a little bit frustrated, answering that second part of your question there, because he's come in as a shooter. He doesn't want to particularly be that guy that needs to facilitate. And it does, I think it definitely plays in your head, especially when you're losing, because he comes in and he moves into this role where he has to be the facilitator and the scorer. And he's done that really well in periods and has been incredible. But I think for a person with the type of personality that he appears to have, without obviously any of us talking to him and knowing who he really is, losing hurts. And when you're not used to losing and you're coming in expecting to be a winner, it does start to play on you psychologically. So if anybody needs Taran Armstrong back, it's obviously Rob Edwards, because he can then focus on his game and purely his game. And then he knows that he can perform to the best of his ability. And if his focus in life playing basketball is scoring, and you're not scoring as well as you can, it's going to make you frustrated. And then things happen like that, where all of a sudden you get fouled out and that game becomes an absolute practice game for Cairns, because, you saw obviously the score, and then you just saw obviously in the rotations that everyone played about 20 minutes, the game was over and everyone got a shot to do their thing. And but you hope that Taran Armstrong comes back and he can focus so we can see the best out of Rob Edwards.
Yeah, I've got one little point here for you, mate, and for both of you guys. And I think it's one thing that needs to be touched on a little bit with the Cairns Taipans, is everyone's touching on Taran Armstrong's obviously out of the team at the moment with injury now, and obviously they're struggling without him and all that sort of stuff as well. And I 100% agree with that sort of narrative right now, that he is their most important player. When he's on the court, this team looks completely different. But the weird one for me is the fact that there was a lot of talk at the start of the season that if Taran Armstrong started the NBL season very, very well, there's a chance he would go over to the NBA on a 10-day contract and have a crack over there, because there was some interest. So why didn't this team go out there and sign at least some sort of depth at the point guard position that is solid enough to be able to carry the load for a complete NBL season? Now, Adam is not that guy. He was signed very, very late in the piece for the Cairns Taipans. Yes, a couple of seasons ago, he was a team captain for Southeast Melbourne Phoenix and was putting up good minutes, but they just never really went and found a solid enough point guard to be able to carry the ship the way they wanted to play their basketball this season. So it's a bit of a weird one for me, the fact that I know they're struggling without Taran Armstrong, but they didn't really go out there and find the depth before the season started to be able to help this if he did go down or he went to the NBA. So I think they're sort of going through a little bit of a down patch right now, purely based on what they've done themselves, to be honest with you guys.
Yeah, I'd say maybe that they knew or had spoken to Taran that, if you have the opportunity, or is the opportunity for real, will you go if you get picked up, or do you need more time to hone your skills and give it a good shot maybe next season? I'd say that's probably something that they know more than what they're kind of talking about, because you don't put your franchise in that situation being so vulnerable. Or the other aspect would be maybe they didn't think he was that important to the team.
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't
he's
know.
definitely important, but it's tough.
Well,
Like,
important in
yeah,
a positive sense, but maybe they didn't think that missing him would be so big, such a big difference
yeah.
as we've seen so far. Maybe they thought that the other players could spot up around and pick up the pieces, which obviously they haven't been able to do.
Yeah, because I think I was
Yeah.
listening to an interview with 40 at the beginning of the season, and I think they knew how important he was, but I think that they obviously didn't expect him to be injured, but I think they felt, oh, okay, he's going to be here. He's going to want to play these big minutes. We've got Rob Edwards going to also want to play big minutes. So they thought, okay, we're going to be pretty safe. We just need to find somebody that's going to be able to come into the rotation and not expect to play these really, really big minutes. And that's why they picked up Adnam late. I think Antonio they maybe also would have thought that he was going to start the season maybe a little bit better. He showed a lot of good signs early, but hasn't maybe come up to the potential that they thought he would. But yeah, they obviously are in a little bit of a pickle and probably should have put a bit more time into that recruitment of finding a point guard that was, I don't know, up to the NBL standard a little bit more than what they have.
Yeah, now that I understand what you're saying, Ryan, I think you're bang on. I don't think that they thought that Taran was going to be as important as he has been for this team. So, in what you're talking about there, I think 100%. I think, you look at the 2 games they've won this season, or 2 of the 3 games they've won, Taran has been the best player on the court by far, and he's had 20 points, and he's had, 5 or 6 assists and 5 or 6 rebounds as well. So, his importance to this team is second to none that we've seen anywhere in the NBL so far. And it's a shame that they didn't go out and construct the roster, and it's a little bit of the 40 sort of style. I think he over picks or over sort of signs in some positions and then under signs in others, and then you're sitting there going, well, now they're struggling in playmaking instead of struggling in big man depth. So they've got 5 or 6 big men, but they've only really got 1 or 2 good point guards or good guards on this team. So it's another poorly constructed team by Adam Ford again, but he always seems to get the job done. So he'll always keep his job up there in the Cairns Taipans sort of roster.
Boys, last thoughts. Who gets the all-important victory in this game? Josh?
I think the Brisbane Bullets get this one, boys. I just think the fact that they've got a little bit more depth and there's not as much question around injury. I read saying that Taran Armstrong was ruled out for round 7 as well, and he'll be back in round 8. So I'm not 100% certain if that's been confirmed just yet, but I've heard that he won't play this week, and I think they're going to give him another week as well. But going off all of that, even if he does play, I would still tend to lean towards the Brisbane Bullets. I think they've got a more set roster right now. I think Josh Bannon's been playing well, Harrison's been playing well, Cook's been playing pretty good, and Prather's starting to find his feet back in the NBL after a couple of seasons in which were pretty shaky as well. So in this game, I've got the Brisbane Bullets, who are, I think, 2-1 their last 3 games as well, and have really started to find some form. And yeah, they've got a really, really nice run coming up. So Brisbane Bullets for me, boys.
Yeah, I think it was a good point you brought up about Prather. He's really started to step up for them, and yeah, he becomes just another aspect of their game where they can score. And I think if they get the most out of Bateman and the most out of, like I said earlier, Harrison and Bannon, then they cruise. They win this game at least.
Yeah, I'm on Brisbane as well. I think they have a better lineup and better scoring, especially against this Cairns.
The way our tipping's going. Oof.
Yeah,
exactly.
Everyone out there, tip Cairns.
If you want to see, listeners and viewers, see the internal tipping comp, we'll put it out on Instagram later. Probably not today. Maybe today. We'll see. Today, when you listen to this, is probably a better day. Boys, last segment before we wrap things up for today's episode. It is the Basketball Fix MVP. We spoke about the MVP contenders a little bit earlier in the episode, but this segment is more about giving votes to players that perform well in each round, and then we tally them up to give a basketball MVP prize to the winner at the end of the season. Josh, I'll throw over to you, mate.
Yeah, so what we'll do quickly is I had the numbers written down somewhere, but it's early morning over here in America right now, but I remember who the 3 players were. So we'll release the top 3 players, which I've written down there, but the numbers will come out next week, as I've been struggling to sort of get this all going this morning. But what we will be doing is starting off with the 3 best performers from last week. Now, there were some incredible games by a lot of these players in the NBL last week, and it was pretty hard to actually narrow down 3 players in the NBL, but I've gone with these 3 guys. Now, again, if there's guys that you guys think who should have been deserved of the 3 votes, let me know afterwards. But let's just kick it off straight away. The 1 vote this week will be going to Jack White. So he had a game with 12 points, 19 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks, and just dominated from the outset of that game as well. And he's really set himself up as an MVP sort of player. And I think it was Jeremy at the start of the year who might have flagged him as sort of, he's either going to be that or he's going to be, a role player in a sense as well, or not a star player, or whatever the case it was. But he's really starting to find his feet for Melbourne United and starting to, I guess, dominate for them as well, and getting that sort of minutes and that impact to be able to do so as well. So he gets the 1 vote for me. The 2 votes goes to Xavier Cooks, 22 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks as well against the Perth Wildcats there. And so much pressure is on Xavier Cooks over these next couple of weeks to be able to obviously, I guess, get this team back on track and obviously be able to carry this team and the load on the offensive and the defensive end as well. He's the only consistent player right now for the Sydney Kings, right? So it's tough, but he's doing an outstanding job for this team and he deserves the 2 votes. And the 3 votes currently goes to Montrezl Harrell. How can it not? 36 points, 16 rebounds, 5 blocks. It's the best NBL game I've seen statistically in probably, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, to be honest with you guys, looking back to a massive game that Bryce had with about 45 points and 6 assists or whatever it was. So when we're touching on, obviously, all-time NBL great games, that is completely up there with them. Now, the leaderboard for the current Basketball Fix MVP, I think we're doing pretty well here, boys, because we're going online with a lot of these MVP predictions right now. But Trey Kell is currently in 3rd. Now, that's probably going to drop over the next couple of weeks with him possibly having 2 or 3 weeks out with injury, but he's still had an incredible start to the season. Xavier Cooks is currently sitting in number 2 after his great start. And Montrezl Harrell, wow, what a story it's been. He missed the first couple of rounds, wasn't it, boys, when they signed him? I think it was round 1 maybe, and round 2 he came in, but he's had an incredible start to the season. I think he's been in the votes every week, whether it be a 1, a 2, or even a 3 for most of these weeks as well. So that rounds out the top 3 currently in the Basketball Fix MVP. And yeah, we'll hopefully get a little trophy made up and try and get in contact with whoever the winner is, and we'll send that over to them for sure with our mugs on there, boys.
Before we wrap things up, I want to just hit up some listener and viewer questions. Josh, you threw out some feelers in some Facebook groups and on Instagram to see if there's any questions that people want to get answered on the show. I've picked up a couple here. First one in the Illawarra Hawks Hawk Talk Facebook group, and one that kind of piqued my interest here from Elaine Henry. Bring back the jump ball. What do you reckon, boys? Bring it back, or are we staying with the arrow?
I love the jump ball. I think it gives an advantage to, players who are taller. Realistically, it's a bit more exciting, isn't it, than just seeing an arrow facing one way and the ref just goes, all right, that team's way, we're going that way. And then, because it can change momentum of a game. If we look at it and just see, let's just say it's late in the piece and we see a jump ball, which isn't a jump ball, it's just a stoppage of time, and we look at an arrow. Let's just say a team's down by a couple of points there, and instead of them just getting the ball automatically, they've got to win that in a jump ball. Let's just say it's someone like, I was going to throw out a couple of small guys, Bryce Cotton taking on Cam Oliver. Let's just say the Perth Wildcats are up by 2 points. Cam Oliver's got to win that jump ball, and it makes the game a bit more interesting. So I kind of like that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a good way to get things started again. It adds more to the competition instead of it just being sort of a giveaway. So, yeah, definitely bring it back. Good call, Elaine.
Bring back the jump ball. And we have Curtis Orford on Instagram wondering, we spoke about this a little bit, but I want to get a more definitive answer. Are Sydney still the championship favourites? Josh?
Nah, I'll jump in straight away. I don't think so. I've ruled Sydney out. They bombed this weekend. Crazily enough, I'm moving it more and more towards Melbourne United being the favourites. I think at the start of the year, we all picked Perth and we all picked Sydney to be up there, but United seem to be the full package at the moment. Their defense can do anything. They had a little hiccup, obviously, when Shaili went out that week, but then straight away they sorted things out after a full week's training and were back to their best. I think their defense wins championships, as we always say, and they have all the pieces there. And yeah, I think we can also expect Jack White to start moving into at least our MVP leaderboards, because he is starting to flourish more and more and more as each game goes on. So I'm leaning more towards Melbourne being the favourites at the moment.
It's a tough one, boys. I don't think Sydney are the favourites right now, but I don't think you can also rule a line through them just yet because of that depth and that sort of firepower that they do have. So they're up there for sure. I think Melbourne may flop come the end of the season, but we'll see how they go. But it's going to be interesting because it's very, very close right now. I don't think there's one clear front runner. I think Illawarra were that front runner and have sort of come back to the pack a little bit in recent weeks. Melbourne are starting to build a little bit of something there. I still think Adelaide are well and truly in the mix. I know the depth's not there, like you've touched on, Ryan. That's your worry. But when you've got 3 of the top 5 scorers in the NBL in your starting lineup, you're going to have a chance every single night. You know, they got Kendrick Davis, Dejan Vasiljevic, and Montrezl Harrell in the top 5 with averages in their points per game. So they're going to be there at the end of the season. And I think obviously the Perth Wildcats will have a bit of a run later on in the season when they get Bryce back as well. So yeah, it's tightly contested. And as we do at the Basketball Fix, I'm going to sit on the fence as always. But I just want to quickly throw out something as well. There is obviously a lot of questions there from all these fan groups and on Instagram as well. So I'm going to be doing a solo episode on Higgins' top 3 takes, answering all of your fan questions as well. So if your question wasn't answered on today's episode, it will be answered on that sort of segment there as well, where I'll dive into a few of them, because there was some pretty incredible questions there. A lot of people have put a bit of time into those questions. So we'll do the right thing by everyone there, and we'll answer all those in a bit of a nice segment that will come out later on this week.
Probably the biggest question, why Graham Lancaster is not allowed to play in the NBL. And I don't want to break the internet by going through the different alternatives on that, the answer to that question. So Graham, we trust in you, mate. Good luck for next week. Boys, let's wrap things up. Coming up on the Basketball Fix, you can catch NBL Supercoach Sessions Path to Pro, as Josh said, Higgins' hot 3 takes. Check out thebasketballfix.com for all your game previews for each NBL round. Boys, thanks for today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls out there in the cyber world listening and watching to the Basketball Fix, we sincerely hope you have gotten your Basketball Fix.
With stars come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.